900 people move to Florida every single day. But beneath their feet, the aquifer supplying 90% of the state's drinking water is draining faster than nature can refill it. This isn't some distant climate crisis. This is an economic time bomb ticking louder with every new subdivision, every new shopping center, every new dream home built on sand. And right now, real estate developers, farmers, and environmentalists are locked in a brutal war over the last gallons of Florida's fresh water. The outcome of this fight will determine whether the Sunshine State keeps booming or becomes the first major U.S. housing market to literally run dry. According to National Geographic analysis, Florida's population surge is colliding headfirst with a water supply crisis that could cap growth within a decade. The warning signs are everywhere. Springs are vanishing. Aquifer levels are plummeting. Legal battles are exploding. And the real estate industry? It's walking straight into a trap most buyers and investors can't even see. Stick around because in this breakdown, we're exposing the hidden water crisis threatening Florida's housing future and why ignoring it could cost you everything. Hit subscribe to Housing Intel for data-driven real estate intelligence that cuts through the noise. Florida looks like paradise. Endless sunshine, palm-lined boulevards, waterfront developments stretching as far as the eye can see. But dig just a little deeper, and the cracks start to show. Canals that once flowed freely now sit stagnant. Natural springs that have bubbled for thousands of years are drying up or slowing to a trickle. The Floridan Aquifer, a massive underground reservoir stretching beneath most of the state, is being pumped at rates that far exceed natural recharge. And the math is brutal. Since 2020, Florida has added over 300,000 new residents every single year. That's 900 people every single day, moving into a state where water is already stretched dangerously thin. The demand isn't just residential. Agriculture devours billions of gallons annually. Industry needs more. Tourism demands pristine beaches and lush golf courses. Everyone wants their piece of Florida, and they all need water to survive. But there's a hard limit to how much freshwater Florida actually has. The Floridan Aquifer isn't infinite. It's a geological formation built over millions of years, recharged by rainfall that filters slowly through limestone. When you pump faster than rainfall can refill, levels drop. Wells run dry. Salt water intrudes from the coasts. Ecosystems collapse, and eventually, the taps stop flowing. That's not speculation. It's hydrology. And Florida is racing toward that cliff at breakneck speed. Here's where it gets even more complicated. Florida's economy has been built on two pillars: agriculture and real estate. For over a century, citrus groves, sugarcane fields, and cattle ranches dominated the landscape. These operations consume staggering volumes of water. A single citrus grove can use millions of gallons per week during growing season. Sugarcane operations in the Everglades agricultural area pull massive amounts from Lake Okeechobee and surrounding wetlands. Cattle ranching across central and northern Florida demands water for livestock and pasture irrigation. These industries have deep roots, political power, and legal water rights dating back decades. They're not going anywhere without a fight. But now, they're facing a new competitor: sprawling suburban housing developments. Between 2020 and 2025, Florida's housing boom reached historic proportions. Developers bought up farmland by the thousands of acres, transforming orange groves and cattle pastures into master-planned communities with tens of thousands of homes. Each new neighborhood needs water infrastructure: drinking water for families, irrigation for landscaping, water for pools, car washes, schools, shopping centers. The demand is relentless. And here's the clash. Both agriculture and development are pulling from the same finite source. When a developer wants to build 5,000 homes on former farmland, they need consumptive use permits from Florida's water management districts. Those permits allocate a specific volume of water the development can legally withdraw. But if the aquifer is already overallocated, those permits get denied or severely restricted. Projects stall, investments hemorrhage money, and developers start suing. In late 2025, multiple legal battles erupted across the state. In Polk County, a major residential developer sued the Southwest Florida Water Management District after being denied permits for a 12,000-home community. The district cited aquifer stress and declining water levels. The developer argued the same district had approved agricultural permits for decades without restriction. Why should housing be treated differently? Similar fights are playing out in Marion County, Hernando County, and along the Treasure Coast. Farmers claim they were here first and have historical water rights. Developers argue housing is essential for Florida's economic growth and that agriculture uses far more water per capita. It's a zero-sum game, and the aquifer is losing. Now add the environmental dimension, and the conflict becomes a three-way war. Florida's natural ecosystems aren't just scenic backdrops. They're the lifeblood of the state's tourism economy, coastal protection, and ecological health. The Everglades alone generates over $8 billion annually in ecosystem services and tourism revenue. But the Everglades is dying of thirst. For over a century, water that naturally flowed south from Lake Okeechobee through the vast wetlands has been diverted. Canals were cut to drain land for agriculture. Levees were built to control flooding for development. The result? The Everglades receives a fraction of the water it needs to survive. Sawgrass marshes have dried out. Wading bird populations have crashed by 90%. The estuaries that depend on freshwater flow from the Everglades are choking on toxic algae blooms, fueled by nutrient-rich agricultural runoff and insufficient flushing. The crisis isn't limited to the Everglades. Florida's natural springs, once crystal-clear windows into the aquifer, are disappearing. Across the state, spring flows have declined by 30 to 50% over the past 3 decades. Iconic springs like Silver Springs, Rainbow Springs, and Wakula Springs are shadows of their former selves. Some have stopped flowing entirely during dry seasons. Why? Overpumping. When groundwater levels drop, springs lose pressure. The water that used to bubble up naturally gets pumped out by wells miles away, feeding subdivisions and farms. Environmental groups have been sounding the alarm for years. Organizations like the Florida Springs Council, Everglades Foundation, and Sierra Club Florida Chapter are pushing hard for water conservation mandates, stricter permitting, and restoration funding. They argue that without healthy ecosystems, Florida's long-term economic viability collapses. No springs means no tourism. Degraded estuaries mean collapsing fisheries. Dead wetlands mean catastrophic flooding and storm surge vulnerability. Their message is clear. You can't build an economy on a foundation of ecological ruin. But their advocacy directly conflicts with both agricultural interests and development pressures. When environmentalists push to reduce agricultural water allocations to restore Everglades flows, farmers scream about economic devastation. When they advocate denying development permits to protect spring flows, real estate lobbies accuse them of blocking jobs and housing supply. It's a political minefield, and Florida's elected officials are caught in the crossfire. So, what does all this mean for real estate? Everything. Water isn't just an environmental issue or an agricultural issue. It's a real estate crisis waiting to explode. And most buyers, investors, and even developers haven't connected the dots yet. Here's the brutal reality. If you can't secure water permits, you can't build. Period. And across Florida, permits are getting harder to obtain. The Southwest Florida Water Management District, which oversees a 16-county region including Tampa Bay, has imposed strict withdrawal limits in certain areas. The St. Johns River Water Management District, covering northeast and east-central Florida, has designated multiple water resource caution areas where new permits face intense scrutiny. The South Florida Water Management District is balancing competing demands from Miami-Dade sprawl, agricultural operations, and Everglades restoration requirements. What this means practically: proposed developments are being delayed, downsized, or outright rejected due to water constraints. A planned community that was supposed to deliver 3,000 homes might only get approval for 800. A commercial development counting on high water use for landscaping and amenities might be forced to redesign with drought-tolerant features and reclaimed water systems, adding millions in costs. For investors and home buyers, this creates a hidden risk. Property in water-stressed regions could face long-term value stagnation or decline. If growth is artificially capped by water availability, the supply-demand dynamics that drive appreciation get disrupted. Compare it to California's Central Valley, where groundwater depletion has made certain agricultural areas economically unviable, or to Las Vegas, where growth has been constrained by Colorado River water allocations. Florida is heading down a similar path. Specific markets are particularly vulnerable. Central Florida counties like Polk, Lake, and Hernando, where rapid suburban expansion is colliding with agricultural water use and spring protection needs. Southwest coastal counties like Sarasota, Charlotte, and Lee, where saltwater intrusion is already contaminating coastal wells and forcing expensive infrastructure upgrades. North Central Florida, around Gainesville and Ocala, where spring flows are critically low and environmental regulations are tightening. These aren't fringe markets. These are areas experiencing some of Florida's fastest population growth and hottest real estate activity. The disconnect is staggering. Buyers are rushing in, attracted by affordability and lifestyle. But the underlying water constraints are ticking time bombs that could derail long-term value. Urban planners and developers are starting to wake up to the crisis, but the solutions are expensive and politically contentious. Some forward-thinking developers are incorporating advanced water conservation into projects from day one. Reclaimed water systems that treat wastewater and reuse it for irrigation and toilet flushing. Rainwater harvesting systems. Native landscaping that requires minimal irrigation. Gray water recycling for individual homes. These technologies work, but they add upfront costs that get passed to buyers or eat into developer margins. There's also a growing push for regional water infrastructure investments. Instead of each community drilling its own wells and depleting local aquifers, counties are exploring regional water supply projects that can source water more sustainably. Some are looking at aquifer recharge projects, where treated stormwater and reclaimed water are injected back into the aquifer to boost levels. Others are investing in aquifer storage and recovery systems that bank water underground during wet seasons and retrieve it during droughts. But these projects require massive public investment, regional cooperation, and long timelines. They're not quick fixes. And they require political will that's often lacking when powerful agricultural and development lobbies are pushing in opposite directions. Then there's desalination, the holy grail solution that Florida keeps flirting with but hasn't fully embraced. Desalination technology removes salt from seawater or brackish groundwater, creating fresh water. It's used successfully in Israel, Saudi Arabia, Australia, and parts of California. On paper, it's perfect for Florida. The state is surrounded by ocean and has abundant brackish groundwater along the coasts. Desalination could theoretically provide unlimited water, decoupling growth from aquifer depletion. But here's the catch. Desalination is insanely expensive and energy-intensive. The Polk Regional Water Cooperative, one of Florida's most ambitious desalination projects under development, is estimated to cost over $1.2 billion and will produce only 30 million gallons per day when fully operational. That's enough for roughly 270,000 people. Sounds like a lot, until you remember Florida is adding 300,000 residents per year. To meet future demand statewide through desalination alone would require dozens of plants costing tens of billions of dollars. Then there's the energy problem. Desalination uses massive amounts of electricity. In a state already facing energy infrastructure challenges and climate-driven cooling demands, adding desalination plants would require significant new power generation. If that power comes from fossil fuels, you're trading one environmental crisis for another. If it comes from renewables, you need massive solar or wind investments that Florida hasn't yet committed to at scale. There's also the brine disposal issue. Desalination produces highly concentrated saltwater waste that must be disposed of carefully to avoid damaging marine ecosystems. All of this makes desalination a complex, expensive, and slow solution. It will play a role in Florida's water future, absolutely. But it's not a silver bullet, and it won't arrive fast enough to solve the immediate conflicts between agriculture, development, and environmental needs. So where does that leave the stakeholders in Florida's water wars? Agriculture is digging in, defending historical water rights, and arguing their economic contribution justifies priority access. The citrus industry alone generates over $7 billion annually for Florida's economy. Sugarcane supports thousands of jobs in rural communities. Ranching provides food security and land stewardship. Farmers argue that without adequate water, Florida's agricultural heritage dies, rural economies collapse, and the state becomes even more dependent on imported food. They're not wrong, but their water consumption is unsustainable at current population levels. Something has to give. Real estate developers are pushing hard for growth-friendly policies, arguing housing supply is essential to keep Florida affordable and economically competitive. They point out that residential water use per capita is actually lower than agricultural use. A typical single-family home uses about 150 gallons per day. A 1-acre citrus grove can use thousands of gallons per day during peak irrigation. Developers argue the math favors converting agricultural land to housing from a water efficiency standpoint, but environmentalists counter that endless sprawl destroys the natural systems that make Florida livable in the first place. They're advocating for smart growth policies that prioritize infill development, urban density, and protection of critical water resources. They want stricter agricultural pollution controls, mandatory water conservation measures, and massive public investment in ecosystem restoration. They argue that without healthy springs, wetlands, and estuaries, Florida's quality of life and economic competitiveness will crater regardless of how many homes get built. The political reality is that all three groups have power, and none can be ignored. Agriculture has deep lobbying influence in Tallahassee and strong support in rural legislative districts. Real estate and development interests fund major political campaigns and have allies in growth-oriented local governments. Environmental groups have grassroots mobilization power, legal expertise, and increasingly, public opinion on their side as water quality issues make headlines. This creates legislative gridlock. Bold water policy reforms get watered down or killed. Agencies tasked with managing water resources face intense pressure from all sides and often split the difference with compromises that don't actually solve the underlying problem. Meanwhile, the aquifer keeps dropping. The springs keep dying. The conflicts keep escalating. And the clock keeps ticking. Florida's water crisis won't resolve itself through market forces or incremental adjustments. It requires comprehensive statewide planning, significant public investment, difficult political compromises, and a fundamental rethinking of growth priorities. That's a tall order in a state with a political culture that celebrates deregulation and local control. But there are glimmers of hope. Some counties are taking proactive steps. Sarasota County has implemented stringent landscape irrigation ordinances and invested heavily in reclaimed water infrastructure. Pinellas County has been a leader in water reuse for decades, recycling nearly 100% of its wastewater. Orange County is pursuing aquifer recharge projects and water conservation incentive programs. At the state level, Florida's Water and Land Conservation Amendment, passed by voters in 2014, dedicated funding for water resource protection and Everglades restoration. While implementation has been inconsistent and underfunded, the framework exists for more aggressive action. The South Florida Water Management District's Everglades Agricultural Area Reservoir Project, currently under construction, represents a $10.5 billion investment in water storage and Everglades restoration. It's the largest environmental infrastructure project in U.S. history. When completed, it will store water during wet seasons and release it south to the Everglades during dry periods, mimicking natural flows and reducing harmful discharges to coastal estuaries. Projects like this prove that large-scale solutions are possible when political will and funding align, but they also highlight the scale of investment required. $10 billion for one piece of the puzzle. Dozens of similar projects would be needed statewide to truly balance water supply, demand, and ecological health. Technology offers additional pathways forward. Smart irrigation controllers that adjust watering based on weather and soil moisture can reduce landscape water use by 30 to 50%. Low-flow fixtures and appliances cut indoor residential use significantly. Agricultural precision irrigation systems deliver water directly to plant roots, eliminating wasteful spray irrigation. These technologies exist and work. The challenge is deployment at scale, which requires incentives, regulations, and education. There's also potential in alternative water sources. Florida receives over 50 inches of rainfall annually on average, far more than many water-stressed regions. The problem isn't lack of rain, it's lack of storage and management infrastructure to capture and use that rain effectively. Expanding stormwater capture, aquifer recharge, and rainwater harvesting could significantly boost available supply without depleting the aquifer. Some experts advocate for a paradigm shift in how Florida values water. Currently, water is essentially free or heavily subsidized. Agricultural and residential users pay for delivery infrastructure and treatment, but not for the water itself. This creates no economic incentive to conserve. Implementing water pricing that reflects true scarcity and environmental cost could drive conservation behavior. It's politically toxic, but economically rational. Users who need large volumes would pay more, creating market pressure to use water efficiently. Those who conserve would benefit financially. It's how markets are supposed to work, but applying market principles to a resource as essential as water is fraught with equity and political challenges. For real estate investors and home buyers, the message is clear. Water risk is real estate risk. Before buying in Florida, especially in rapidly growing inland areas or coastal regions facing saltwater intrusion, ask hard questions. What's the water source? Is the aquifer levels stable or declining? Are there pending permit restrictions? How is wastewater treated and disposed? What's the long-term water supply plan for the county? Is the area vulnerable to saltwater intrusion? These aren't typical due diligence questions, but they should be, because a home or investment property is only valuable if it has reliable access to clean water. If that access becomes restricted, expensive, or unreliable, property values will suffer. Look at what's happening in parts of the western U.S. Properties dependent on shrinking Colorado River water allocations have seen value impacts. Subdivisions with failing wells face costly infrastructure upgrades or abandonment. Florida isn't there yet, but the trajectory is concerning. The smart money is paying attention to water infrastructure, conservation policies, and aquifer health as core components of real estate analysis. It's also worth watching regulatory trends. If Florida implements stricter water permitting, development caps, or conservation mandates, certain markets could see supply constraints that boost values in areas with secure water access while depressing values in restricted zones. That creates investment opportunities for those who understand the landscape and risks for those who don't. What can individual Floridians do? Plenty. Adopt water-efficient landscaping. Install low-flow fixtures. Fix leaks promptly. Support local and state policies that fund water infrastructure and conservation. Engage in public comment processes when water permits and development projects are proposed. Vote for candidates who prioritize sustainable water management. It sounds small, but collective action matters. Public pressure has already forced policy changes on issues like Everglades funding and spring protection. Continued advocacy can accelerate solutions. For developers and businesses, the call to action is even clearer. Integrate water sustainability into every project from the start. Don't just meet minimum regulatory requirements, exceed them. Invest in reclaimed water, water-efficient design, and aquifer recharge. Market these features as selling points. Forward-thinking buyers and investors increasingly value sustainability and resilience. Projects that demonstrate water responsibility will differentiate themselves in a crowded market and future-proof against regulatory tightening. Florida's water wars are not a distant problem for future generations. They're happening now, in courtrooms, legislative chambers, and water management district meetings across the state. The outcome will determine whether Florida's real estate boom continues, stalls, or collapses under the weight of its own thirst. The aquifer doesn't care about economic growth projections or political promises. It's governed by geology and hydrology. Pump faster than recharge, and it depletes. Simple as that. The question is whether Florida's leaders, industries, and citizens can summon the political will, investment capital, and collaborative spirit needed to manage water sustainably before crisis becomes catastrophe. The data is clear. The warning signs are flashing. The conflicts are escalating. And the clock is ticking. Ignoring Florida's water crisis won't make it go away. It will only make the eventual reckoning more painful and expensive. But armed with knowledge, you can navigate this landscape strategically. You can avoid water-stressed markets, invest in water-secure communities, and advocate for policies that protect both economic growth and environmental health. Because in the end, Florida's water wars will be won or lost not by any single interest group, but by the collective choices of millions of residents, investors, developers, farmers, and policymakers. The future of Florida's real estate market is being decided right now. One permit, one policy, 1 gallon at a time. If this breakdown opened your eyes to a crisis most people are ignoring, smash that like button right now. Subscribe to Housing Intel for weekly data-driven real estate intelligence that exposes the trends shaping markets before they hit the mainstream. And drop a comment below. Are you concerned about water access in your Florida market? Do you think agriculture or development should get priority? We read every single comment. We'll see you in the next video, where we reveal the Florida markets that are actually solving the water crisis and positioned for sustainable long-term growth. Because sometimes, knowing where the problems are hiding is the most valuable real estate intelligence of all.